She was just the help. They made her a spectacle. She made them pay with physics. Celeste, a quiet server at an exclusive, lavish party, becomes the victim of a cruel game when the billionaire host, Isaac, throws her into a piranha pool for the entertainment of his wealthy guests. What the rich elite didn't know is that Celeste's apron hides the mind of a marine scientist who understands the water better than they understand their own arrogance, bleeding and fighting for her life against 30 red-bellied piranhas. She relies on her knowledge of fish feeding patterns and the pool's pump system. Her survival is a silent act of vengeance and social justice against the party's cruelty. Escaping the water, Celeste quickly breaks into the equipment room and reverses the current, turning the luxury pool into a terrifying whirlpool, making the true predators on the deck face a consequence they never expected. This survival thriller is a sharp look at class warfare, resilience, and the power of knowledge against privilege. Watch how the ultimate underdog uses science and calm to turn a death sentence into poetic justice. What would you have done? Let us know your thoughts on Celeste's final move in the comments. Like and subscribe if you are rooting for the underdog. Hit the bell for more stories of justice and unexpected twists. Piranha Pool Revenge Story Survival Thriller Celeste Isaac Class Warfare Social Justice Underdog Scientific Revenge Piranha's Karma Must-watch viral short Pool Party Gone Wrong. The filter's hum lay beneath the quartet like a second heartbeat, low and steady, filling the edges of the party with a mechanical whisper. Glass walls turned the pool into a stage. 30 red-bellied piranhas drifted in their orbit, silver flashes of muscle and precision. Champagne light bounced from the water to the ceiling, dancing over white stone, designer heels, diamonds that winked like small planets. Every breath smelled of citrus and money. Celeste moved through the brightness with a tray balanced in her hands. 3 glasses, each a narrow column of gold, bubbles climbing in disciplined ladders. The air conditioning failed at the corners of the terrace, leaving heat to press against her neck. She adjusted her grip, wrists straight, shoulders down. Her uniform still smelled faintly of detergent and hotel bleach. She kept her smile practiced and neutral, the one that said she was present but untouchable, a ghost built for service. Invisible. She reminded herself of that word every shift. Isaac appeared beside her, not as a man, but as an event. His linen jacket gleamed under the lights, his hair perfectly careless, the scent of his drink, oak, lime, arrogance, drifted toward her before he spoke. "Know your place," he said quietly, the tone meant for her alone. His hand closed around her forearm, not bruising, just final. The glasses trembled. One bead of champagne leapt over the rim, landed on the stone, and vanished. The quartet kept playing, pretending nothing had happened. Conversations folded around them, polite as napkins. A woman's laughter crackled like broken glass. Someone whispered about the reef project and its generous sponsor. Isaac's thumb pressed harder. He guided her toward the pool. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he said, raising his voice. "My little predators. Imported. Pure discipline." Guest drifted closer, phones lifting as if gravity bent differently around his wealth. The glass wall shimmered with reflections, faces, glitter, open mouths. The fish turned together, 30 coins flipping under light. Celeste's breath caught. She remembered their behavior pattern, the one she had studied years ago when her name was still printed on university paper instead of embroidered on an apron. "Stay still. Do not bleed. Do not feed the current." Isaac's grip slid lower. The tray tilted. The 3 flutes tipped and shattered against the tile, their sound sharp as laughter. Every head turned. Even the violin hesitated, one wrong note dangling in the heat. Clumsy, a woman said, delighted. It's fine, Celeste answered, her voice smooth as hotel marble. You'll learn, Isaac said louder, for the crowd now. Under a minute. Right. A man near the bar laughed. If she panics, 40 seconds. Who's timing? Isaac asked. Hands lifted phones. The glow of screens multiplied across the water. Celeste placed the empty tray down. Her pulse thudded under the music. She didn't look at the audience. She looked at the pool, the line where glass met tile, the soft shimmer of the filtration grate at the shallow end. 1, 2, 3. Count the heartbeats. Stay invisible. The push came casual, almost lazy. One palm against her shoulder, a flick of force. The world dropped out. Water crashed around her like a slammed door. Cold clawed at her ribs. Sound shrank to a muffled drum. Her uniform filled, dragged her down. Chlorine stung her throat. She pressed her lips shut and forced her limbs to stillness. The light fractured above her, 100 trembling coins. The piranhas drifted closer, cautious, their bodies commas, rewriting the paragraph of the water. She did not move. Stillness bought seconds. Above, the violins quivered and died. Isaac's voice echoed, distorted through water. Time her. The crowd answered with laughter, the sound thinning through the surface. She felt the ripples of their footsteps tremble the glass. A cube of ice dropped and sank past her face, spinning, then another. The fish pivoted at each disturbance. She memorized their rhythm, not random, pattern. She knew the feeding pattern better than he knew the pockets of his own jacket. Her lungs started to burn, a clean, sharp fire behind her ribs. She angled slightly, just enough to see the grate. The suction current whispered along her calf. She could feel how the water moved, how it pulled. Knowledge, not fear, guided her stillness. Above, Isaac laughed again. The sound vibrated through the tile. Earn your keep, he said, and another plate splashed the water. Shards drifted downward, pale as jellyfish. She closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. Through the blur, one fish glinted closer, its scales red as muscle. The mouth opened, a wedge of white. Pain ripped her forearm like a hot wire drawn through flesh. She bit the water instead of screaming. Blood ribboned outward. Silk and blue light, not random, pattern. She followed its logic. They would move toward motion and scent, not silence. She pulled herself tight to the wall, turned her bleeding arm behind her back, counted heartbeats. The frenzy rotated, redirecting. Her blood threaded into the current, a map she could read. The crowd gasped above her. She felt their thrill as pressure in the water. Her blood threaded into the current, a rectangle of brightness barely 2 yards away. The grate hummed near her feet. She gathered her knees, a swimmer's crouch, and pushed gently upward. Not thrash, angle. The surface neared. Air shimmered there, fragile as glass. She broke it with her face, stole a thin breath through her nose. She's alive, someone said. Not for long, Isaac replied. His shadow moved across the water. Ice rained again, cubes bouncing off her shoulders. She ignored them. Calm confuses them, she thought. Chaos redirects. She needed a sacrificial piece that smelled of her but wasn't her. Her fingers worked at the knot of her shoe under the surface. Slick leather slipping, lace against skin felt alive. The knot gave. She pulled one shoe free, heavy with water. She swung her arm and threw it hard toward the deep end. The fish turned as one, a flash of silver. The leather fluttered like a wounded thing, bleeding scent and motion. The school veered. Celeste surged toward the edge. Her fingertips found the tile, cold, smooth, saving. She felt the pull of the grate again and locked her wrist against the coping, fingers finding a notch she could use. A heartbeat of hope flickered through her chest. A shadow filled her sky. Isaac's shoe descended. Perfect leather, polished cruelty. The heel crushed her fingers. Pain exploded white behind her eyes. Her body jerked. Bubbles tore from her throat. He leaned, voice quiet enough to sound intimate. "You don't get to survive this," he said. Her hands slipped. The tile vanished. Water swallowed her again. The cold clamped over her face, familiar now, almost kind. She drifted backward until her spine kissed the wall. The pain in her hand pulsed with the rhythm of her heart. She ignored it. Above, someone screamed, someone laughed. The violin was gone. Only the filter hummed. She opened her eyes. The blood from her arms spread in thin veils, turning the water pink at the edges. The fish shifted toward it, cautious, efficient. She waited for the right second. Her body was trembling, but her mind had gone still. A calm space where equations lived. She thought of the feeding patterns again. The way vibration, not scent, drew them when water changed direction. She imagined the pipes behind the wall, the switch Isaac had bragged about earlier, the one that could reverse the flow for cleaning. She had seen it once, on a tour she wasn't meant to understand. She had understood perfectly. The pain in her hand anchored her to the present. The grate's hum grew louder. A promise. She would reach it, but not yet. Above, voices blended into a blur of human sound. Panic, disbelief, the kind of noise people make when they realize entertainment has turned into consequence. The air smelled of fear now. Even through the water, Celeste closed her eyes. She felt the current stroke her legs, the pull, gentle but insistent. Her lungs were fire. She exhaled a small stream of bubbles and felt her body sink another inch. The world narrowed to heartbeat, hum, and light. Invisible, she reminded herself. Not prey, not noise. Her fingers drifted toward the grate, metal-brushed skin. She felt the suction take her blood thread and swallow it whole. Somewhere above, Isaac barked a command that the water stole. She opened her eyes and stared upward through the shifting blue. Light carved his silhouette sharp against the night. The crowd stood behind him, their faces half reflection, half fascination. Phones still pointed down, lenses glinting like cold eyes. Celeste held the image in her mind, the predator framed by his own glass cage, and let her fear harden into precision. She would surface again, but not yet. The current was hers to read. The water around her darkened, thick with her blood, and the beginnings of the frenzy. The sound of it was a heartbeat multiplied 30 times over. Her body trembled, but her gaze stayed fixed on the grate, on the whisper of escape and reversal waiting beyond it. The hum deepened. The party noise blurred into one long, rising note. Celeste drew one last slow breath from her memory and prepared to move. The world above her shimmered with light, laughter, and cruelty. The world below held machinery, current, and possibility. She turned toward the grate. The current pulled stronger now, urging her forward. She listened. The water spoke in rhythms she could finally understand. The grate's pull whispered along her calves like a steady hand, and she let it guide her a measured inch at a time. Chlorine lived in her mouth. The water tasted like pennies, and pretending, she kept her body quiet. A deliberate hush inside the blue. The crowd above was glare and appetite. The glass wall held them back the way a polite lie holds back a reckoning. He did not know she had written the feeding patterns he was betting against. He did not know the language the fish obeyed. Lived in her bones. Blood feathered from her forearm and thinned as the suction took it. Her fingers skimmed the metal lattice, cool where lime had roughened the edges. The school tightened and loosened in small pulses, mouths opening and shutting like clocks that only count instinct. She angled her bleeding arm behind her and let the wall carry the tremor in her hand. air was a far room at the end of a long hallway. She rose toward it as a careful dancer stands from the floor, slow enough to keep the water from noticing. Her face broke the skin, sound cracked open, voices, ice, a fork skipping on stone. She took a single breath through her nose and sealed herself closed again. A man announced a time as if he had invented it. Another corrected him with a laugh that wanted applause. Isaac's pleasure stretched over the deck like a white sheet. Under a minute, he said, speaking a spell he believed in. She sank. The pool sealed over her crown with a soft sigh. The light grew green and heavy. The fish drew nearer, not hunting yet, testing. One grazed her skirt and veered when it learned cloth and calm. The sea glass on her wrist tapped her skin, a cool circle that remembered a shore. Sarah's voice lived in that color when the dark was loud. Swim parallel. Do not fight the rip. Let the water carry you where it is already going. Then angle out when you can. A nip pricked her calf, sharp and tidy. Her body flinched, and she pressed the recoil down before it became a splash. Calm confuses them. Chows redirects. She had written those words once in a paragraph. No one at this party would have read without a tutor to explain it. The memory steadied her like a hand at the spine. She pictured a lab tank and a humming room. A finger tapped glass and a shoal darted toward the lie, then slowed when no further proof followed. Movement without meaning was rumor. She would not be rumor. She would let the water carry her voice to the right ears. She set herself into a long glide toward the shallow end. Strokes so thin the water barely changed its mind about her. Her toes pointed to narrow her wake. Each pull skimmed along tile, as if tracing a seam. The grate's breath settled into her legs. The pump's hum grew teeth she could feel in her ribs. She surfaced for a counting breath. Perfume sharpened the air. Champagne climbed laddered bubbles in 100 narrow throats. The quartet had fallen still, but their last note lingered in the metal of the railings. Someone asked why she was not thrashing, as if he had been cheated of a promised firework. Another offered a theory with the confidence born of never having been wrong in public. A woman's voice, low and tired, said the truest sentence of the hour, and no one rewarded her with anything but silence. She dropped back into the quiet that did not belong to them. The grate was near enough to read with her hands. 4 screws in the corners. The lattice hummed a steady machine heartbeat. The current drew her blood thread and tucked it into dark. The way wind hides a strand of hair, the glass wall threw warped reflections down to her. Shoes made a skyline. A hem flickered like a small flag. Phone screens were moons with tiny red eyes. Isaac leaned into the light, linen bright, smile wide. The room loved him for loving himself. He had given her this place as a map weeks ago. Thinking he was offering a tour, he had tapped the glass and said the word conversation without irony. He had listed numbers like a catechism and pronounced whirlpool like a secret only wealth could know. She had watched the way his lip curled when he said it, and filed away both the word and the curl. The equipment door sat behind the clipped hedge near the shallow stairs. The panel inside was a landscape of sliders, boxes, warning labels, and chevrons. Reverse flow, not recommended with occupants. She could see the font and the tiny arrow in her mind, even now, crisp as if it glowed under her eyelids. Her lungs were a kiln, the skin at her temples pulled tight. Teeth took a small bite from the top of her arm, the sting precise and professional. She pressed shoulder to tile and made the pain part of the wall. The fish shifted with each small invitation. The shoe she had sacrificed pinwheeled through the deep, a false prey breaking thread by thread. A pair of fish examined it, lost interest, moved back to the better rumor. She waited them out. She was not bait, she was a decision. She tipped her chin and lifted her face through air, like a slow coin surfacing in a fountain. One breath, the air tasted of fear now, even under citrus and yeast. She went under and felt the school fold closer in a ragged band. Little black eyes, absolute and untroubled. She respected that morality belonged to air. Water did not deal in mercy or sin, only cause and effect, and the patience of physics. Her knee rose an inch, the wall gave her a plane. Her fingers tracked the grate to tile, then tile to coping. She measured the lip by feel. It was there, a hard line, a hand could trust. She surfaced without asking the water for permission, set her good hand on stone, and locked her wrist at the notch the coping offered. Hope flickered low and hot. She gathered it like a match cupped against wind. His heel came down on her hand, with the certainty of a signature. Bone and skin met leather and stone, and the world went white at the edges. Her body begged to thrash. She refused. The sound that escaped her belonged to the pool, and it swallowed it the way it swallows rain. "You do not climb out," he said, breath scented with limes, and a victory he had not earned. She slid, and the water took her back. Silence inside her grew sharp. She honed it. The fish nosed nearer now, their certainty growing because the water said yes, and the man above said yes. She denied both with the only tool she owned. She stilled again, each muscle a letter spelling no. A plate shattered the surface at the deep end and became froth and white noise. Two fish jolted toward the lie, collided, then separated with small insults. Isaac laughed. Phones laughed. The glass made their delight look shallow and mean. Her lungs seized and released. She let them argue. She moved along the wall by inches, blind to anything but the slab under her fingers and the path the hum drew. When the pull pressed strongest against her shin, she knew where the intake sat beneath the deck, knew how the line ran, knew where the panel waited beyond the hedge, knew the cheap transformer that made the light stutter on the rosemary every narrow dozen seconds because appearance had edged out competence in the budget. She did not plan to climb out. She planned to move the water. Her palm found the seam again, and her forearm burned. She set the wrist, used the notch, rose enough for a breath that felt like a loan, took it, and paid it back with stillness. On the deck, a young woman's voice cracked. Someone told her not to be dramatic and made drama of the sentence. Security boots took 2 steps, hung in a pause, and obeyed the small flick of Isaac's gaze. His control wore a smile and a cuffling. Celeste dipped under and counted, not seconds but beats, the slow tick of a clock that had learned how to wait without forgiveness. The school surged and settled, pulled by rumor and scent, attention a tide. When the wave of them crested, she moved, a quiet streak along the seam. She used her feet like thoughts, 2 small skulls that looked like nothing. A yard of tile passed, another. The shallow steps ghosted into view. Pale shelves under blue. She rose for a sip of air, then fell back to the floor of the pool with the grace of a creature that had practiced survival in lanes and long nights. The arguments above lost grammar and became sound. The water refused to care. At the steps, the depth slackened. Corners made fish bold and clumsy. She kept her shoulder to the wall and slid beyond the first tread. Then the second, the hum in the tile softened. She needed it loud again. The door would be where the hum spoke like a throat against her palm. She surfaced and found the hedge clipped cruelly. A living thing forced to imitate sculpture. A spiderweb stitched 2 leaves, trembling under party air. She pulled breath deep and let it sit in her blood like a promise. A shoe-scuffed tile. 2 guards appeared in the light, hands close to empty holsters, because guns at parties made bad copy. Isaac said a word that meant, "Stop," without admitting fear. They stopped. She read that order through shine and glass, and the small rancor in his jaw. She slipped back down and let the Great's map run through her fingers until the corner changed. There, the angle, the panel beyond the wall. When she pressed her teeth together, she felt the pump in her skull. Her lungs shouted and she bargained. 15 heartbeats. She would give the water 15. The school flared and wove again, pulled by the thread of her blood and the tournament he had fed them. She remained a seam and a refusal. She surfaced, the air scratched and soothed. Someone announced a time with a triumph shaped like greed. Isaac repeated his line as if speaking a thing could make it law. She set her palm on coping and did not climb. She slid her shoulders under the lip, moved along the deck until the hedge shadowed the glass. Her back rasped concrete. The sea glass tapped her wrist twice. Patient. Move. A tail brushed her ribs, teeth nipped her hip and darted away. Red went thin, then richer, then thin again. She made herself the quietest fact in the pool. The frenzy looked for an edge, and met only edges she owned. When the wall turned from glass to rougher stone, she knew she was beneath the equipment room. The hum became a growl that lived in her chest. She exhaled and sank enough to press her palms against the seam of a vent. Air spoke through the high grate. It pulled her hair and breathed metal. Through a small wire screen, the panel glowed. Low and certain, she made her choice. She angled toward the steps. She would surface where tile and hedge met and run while gravity still recognized her. She would break a lock with whatever the world offered her hand. She rose as if the water were a stubborn idea, and she was the counter-argument. The surface gave. She slipped her face into air where shadows pooled and breath waited like a gift she had earned. A tray clattered. A woman sobbed an apology to no one brave. The guards read Isaac for orders, and Isaac told them to watch film. His body said, "Film me owning this." Celeste took one breath and put her hands on the lowest stair. She crawled forward without splash, a motion borrowed from seals and grief. 2 strokes. 3. Her chest slid over til. Her legs cleared the lip. Air hit her hard enough to feel like a shout. Her knees found stone. The world tilted and she let it. Water ran warm out of her ears. Behind glass, the fish turned circles inside someone else's story. "Stop her," Isaac said, pleasant as a drink order. She stood barefoot. Barefoot, sea glass tapped her wrist. Left. Hedge. Door. Panel glow leaking through a seam. Her body moved like a decision that had been waiting its hour. Boots stroke til. She ran. Night air cut her lungs. Her hand burned and promised. Chlorine gave way to the industrial tang of the room beyond the door she had been shown and not trusted with. The handle was smooth and smug. Locked. A decorative rock sat in a bed of white gravel like a skull pretending to be art. She lifted it. Its weight argued with her torn palm. She swung. Wood jumped and rang. She swung again. Splinters bloomed like dry flowers. She swung a third time and the latch tore. The door gave. Chemical air washed her face. Machine hum met her like a familiar returning from war. She shoved a metal shelf with her shoulder. Bottles slid and thudded. Plastic skated. The feet screeched a hard line across concrete and wedged against the door. Fists hit the other side. A voice said open. Another said now. Her fingers smeared red on glass. The panel woke into numbers and warnings. Flow. Direction. Reverse. She did not hesitate. The word mercy flashed and she deleted it. She chose logic instead. The pumps changed key and climbed toward a tone that sounded like consequence. Outside, the water began to change shape. Guests felt it through their shoes and did not know what to call it. Isaac turned. The pool started to spin. First, a suggestion, then a plan. The fish tried to swim straight and found themselves slipping sideways into a whirl their bodies did not understand. One leapt and smacked glass with a soft, desperate thud. She popped the emergency window latch and shoved it open. Night air rushed in. Her lungs took it like a cure she had paid for in blood. She climbed to the sill, dropped into the hedge, and turned to the glass to see the thing she had made. Isaac's voice cracked for the first time. "What did you do?" She stood in shadow and watched the water obey the math she knew. She raised her bleeding hand and wiped her mouth. The taste of metal receded under the taste of night. The sea glass felt like a fist. The whirl began as a suggestion, a wrinkle in the skin of the pool, and then the wrinkle learned to speak. Water tipped its sentence toward the middle. Light slid with it. A pale disk, drifting down like a coin, dropped into a well that has no bottom. The fish corrected, then corrected again, and still the current shouldered them sideways. Patient as a conveyor, Celeste stayed in the head shadow, breath held to a narrow line, one hand firm at her ribs, where cold had set a deep ache. The machine hum inside the equipment room climbed half a note and settled, a new key that matched the push of blood in her ears. The pumps had found rhythm. The pool obeyed. Guests felt the change first through their shoes, a tremor in the stone. Not an earthquake, not a train, more like a giant exhale under the floor. Conversations faltered, then tried to reassemble with jokes that could not stand. "What is that?" a man asked, performative calm, dangling from each word. "It is part of the feature." Another guest, very exclusive. Isaac moved to the glass with his hands open in host posture, the smile working, while the eyes did not. He scanned surface, shallow end, broken door, the shelf wedged at the jamb, and the color drained from his face by a shade. "Relax," he told the crowd and himself. "It is a setting." The water answered by deepening its bow. The center sank another inch of depth. The eye could feel as a drop in the stomach. Waves stitched outward and licked the tile, soaking linen cuffs that had never met labor. A woman hopped back with a neat squeal and tried to laugh at herself. No one gave her the safety of a laugh in return. Celeste watched the school lose its language. The fish fought the force and lost. Their bodies were built for sharp turns and absolute bites, not the long persuasion of a false tide. They tumbled and righted and tumbled again. Little knives turned into tin toys by the muscle of water itself. Fists hammered the equipment door behind her in an angry rhythm that could not catch the pumps. A voice promised consequences through wood and steel. She did not turn. She could read the panel by sound alone. The climb would hold at the edge of unsafe. The thin line sold as thrill in a brochure, the line he loved to pronounce. The thin line was hers now. Calm, she told herself. The logic is the mercy. This was not revenge. This was physics and the honest truth that lives under it. Move the water, and men reveal themselves. On the deck, phones rose again, jittery hands. Finding the small red dot, a guest in a blue blazer leaned over the glass. Camera close, angle greedy. The vortex tugged, subtle and real, and the blazer's center of gravity drifted, the way money drifts when it has never learned balance. "Careful," another hissed, catching his sleeve. "Do not get close to the edge," Isaac said to the light rather than to people. The water took a breath, then another, deeper. The bowl in the middle became a mouth. Foam gathered where lips would be. The fish had no strategy left but motion. Red bellies flashed and vanished. Not hunting now, only enduring. Cold, dried, uneven on Celeste's skin. A patchwork of chill and heat, where blood turned tacky. Her hand shook once. She let it, and then let it go. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. Metal faded tonight on her tongue. The sea glass lay cool at her pulse, the weight of a promise made to a friend pulled out by a current she had not reached in time. A promise made to a reef that might still hear if she could make the world listen. Isaac looked from water to equipment door and back the way a man searches two exits for the same answer. His voice cracked for the first time, a small fracture in a polished thing. "What did you do?" She did not answer. The pool answered. Water ran forward and then down, a long, low funnel, forming just enough to trouble the most expensive stomachs on the terrace. A line of champagne flutes sang a thin ring. A waiter with hands that had washed too many plates steadied his tray and kept moving because paid people keep moving. Security split. One pair shoved on the wedged shelf again. Another braced at the glass with poles and rings that looked like theater props under patient white light. A guard glanced toward Isaac for instruction, a small act of faith. Isaac did not see it, his gaze fixed on the center, on the humming hollow he had paid to install because danger was a toy to him. "Switch it off," he said, as if he still owned obedience. Now, no one obeyed. The controls were behind the door she had blocked, in the room she had already left. For the first time that night, ownership mattered less than access. A glass slid, then fell, then burst. Sound cracked the hush, and the audience broke script. Someone shouted to kill the power at the main. Someone else yelled breaker. Two guests, drunk on the wild freedom of fear, sprinted toward the house and tripped on the step and rolled apart and sprang up like clowns pretending they had planned it. Celeste stayed still and watched. The pool was a system in her mind, inputs and outputs, friction and flow. She tracked change by eye and ear the way she had tracked tide and surge in a classroom she had once loved. For the room she left to keep a different promise. The water reached its edge and held there, a throat humming one unbroken note. A fish tried to cut across the spin and was thrown into a curve it had not chosen. Its body smacked glass, a soft punctuation. Another followed, and nicked its mouth, and left a blush of blood that slid down and vanished into the spiral. The crowd stepped back as spray reached them. Linen darkened. Silk learned weight. Diamonds looked like cold rain. Isaac moved along the lip, shouting orders that broke apart before they landed. His shoes clicked on stone. Balance learned what the blue blazer had learned. That glass looks solid until it is the only thing between you and a moving force. He put one foot near a damp patch and felt it slip a fraction. His arms lifted, instinct older than pride. Her breath caught, not with fear for him, and not with hope either, but with the recognition of a step you can already hear as echo. She had watched a rip pull at a swimmer who did not understand. The body's first answer was fight. The water's first answer was no. A sheet of foam stroked his shoe. He looked down. The moment stretched thin enough to see through. He took one step back, then another. Posture pulled into caution by a hand he could not name. The fall did not come yet. He turned his head toward the equipment door and ran. The shelf held one beat, then two. On the third hit from the inside, the legs skidded and jumped the groove she had carved. The door yawned and Isaac shouldered through. Inside, the panel glowed a steady warning. The guards shoved the shelf aside and followed. Celeste did not move. She listened. The machines kept their tone, heavy and even. The reverse held. The panel demanded a manual sequence that took longer than panic could afford. She had counted those beats months ago, memorized the order and the time it asked. Logic, not rage. Chlorine sharpened as spray broke fine. The guests staggered backward, phones tight as rosaries. "Turn it off," someone screamed. "Pull the breaker." Another pleaded to switches since men were failing. A guard sprinted to the main housing on the house wall, a steel box near a marble lion. whose jaw had never felt rain. His key scraped and found and turned. The door swung wide. Levers and labels glinted. He reached for the largest. "Wait," Isaac shouted from the equipment room, voice bending around the word, "Do not." The guard froze with his hand on the lever. He looked to the glass for a reflection of his employer. The glass gave him back a warped face, blue and bright and useless. Celeste marked her math. The pool did not need many more heartbeats to translate theory into consequence. The fish were fully inside the spin now. Bodies turned to scraps of habit. They bit where they bumped. Reflex, not malice. Water had remade them into secondary. It would do the same to a man. She stepped from the hedge. The motion was simple and therefore powerful. Dripping uniform, bare feet gray with dust, hair a dark rope, one wrist bright with green glass. No one saw her until she was already there. The crowd parted like a thought, and then realized it had, and tried to undo it and failed. She moved to the strip of deck where a small window gave a waterproof view into the panel. Numbers glowed under plastic. Warnings pulsed in thin, clean fonts. The word "reverse" was a small flag in a corner. A timer beside it counted a hold requirement she had already met. A woman in diamonds sized Celeste's arm. Her fingers were soft and desperate. "You have to stop this." "You filmed," Celeste said. The hand let go like a leaf cut from a stem. Someone sobbed her name without knowing if they had the right. She did not grant or deny the right. The pool deepened its mouth. Foam kicked higher. A pole struck surface and spun from human hands, seized by the current, as if it had always belonged to water. Isaac burst from the equipment room, slick with sweat, hair torn from its cost. "Move." He barked at his men, shouldering past. His shoe hit a wet patch and slid. This time the correction came late. His arms windmilled. One foot found nothing. For a beat, he balanced on a line only he could feel. His palms squealed on glass. His body tipped over the mouth of his own machine and went. The sound was not a splash. It was a blunt punch, water rejecting and then accepting him. The vortex took his waist and pulled the way a crowd takes a body and decides to carry it. 100 throats released a sound the party had rehearsed as joy, and did not know how else to make. Isaac's head rose once. Air hit him like a creditor. "Help! Help!" he said, and the word broke in the middle. He locked eyes with Celeste across the moving water. Panic unlatched his jaw. The truth tore out ragged and wet. "I poisoned the reef. I lied about the schedule." Phones snapped closer, as if pulled by their own small gravity. "Ring," a guard shouted. "Rope." A life ring skidded and flew. It hit the surface and spun away. A toy on a stringed top. The rope snaked out after it, eager and useless. The fish struck where his legs bumped them. Not a frenzy, only reflex bites. Quick and exact. He kicked and found no purchase that did not push him back harder. His face learned a new color. Celeste kept breathing. In, out, count and set. She could shut it down. She knew where and how. Mercy rose and she erased it. Mercy here would be a lie men could spend later. Logic was the only currency that held. An older man stepped toward her, jacket cuff soaked. "Please," he said, "he will die." "He will not," she answered, voice level. "Not if anyone here knows how to move." No one did. That was part of the story. She walked the line of the pool to the small window again. Panel lights blinked their sequence. A button under a shield would end the reverse. Flatten the water. Hand control back to men. She touched the cover. Her fingers lift a smear. She did not lift it yet. Under the glass, Isaac's mouth opened and closed, and opened. His eyes found her through the moving blue, and terror made him honest again. "Please." She let him see her. She let him know who had broken the rule and why. He looked like a man who had noticed the ground keeps score. Confess, someone shouted, worshipping content rather than truth. A few brittle laughs broke and fell flat. The current tugged him nearer the center. His breath shortened to the animal kind. A fish bumped his shoulder and bounced. Blood veined away from the nick like a signature. The pumps held their key. The pool sang the long note she had asked for. She waited until the edge of her math, where consequence stayed sharp and life stayed possible. Then she moved. She slipped through the gap at the equipment door and stepped to the panel. Her hands shook. She disliked that, and put it aside by flattening her palm against the glass and counting to the number she had promised would be enough. She flipped the shield and pressed stop. A tiny red eye on the panel's camera blinked once and went dark. Having seen what it needed to see, for a breath, nothing happened. Panic tried to grow teeth. She did not offer it a mouth. The machines began their downshift. The hums softened. The long note fell. Outside, the mouth of the pool closed, slow and reluctant, like an eye losing a dream. The ring stopped spinning and drifted toward an edge. A pole caught on tile and stayed. The rope snake straightened to a line. Two guards braced and reached, and found a man heavy with linen and regret. They hauled, his body folded over coping and spilled onto deck. He coughed water that sounded like broken glass. He rolled and wretched and breathed. His suit was bitten and torn. His hands were a map of small cuts. He was alive and remade. Celeste stood in the doorway, spray painting her in lights and darks. Her breathing slowed. The pumps whispered themselves quiet. Phones remembered they were witnesses. The night adjusted around its new shape. Isaac lifted his head. His eyes found her across the deck. He saw the hedge, the broken door, the panel window, the woman who had used a system he bought to prove a thing he refused to learn. Fear arrived in him the size of a coin. It would grow. Sirens began as rumor and became fact. Tires sighed along the long drive. Red and blue pushed toward white stone like weather. Somewhere inside the house, a breaker box door swung and clicked shut. Celeste looked once at green glass on her wrist, then at the pool that had learned her name, then at the man who had not and now would. She did not speak. Sirens braided the night into red and blue. The long drive swallowed vehicles one by one. First, a patrol car, then another, then an ambulance that sighed like a tired animal. Celeste stood in the doorway of the equipment room and did not step back. Wind pushed her damp hair across her face. The smell of chlorine was heavy and human. Tires ground into gravel. Radios cracked. Doors opened. Officers poured into the white light that had once been meant for champagne and laughter. Body cameras blinked their tiny blue pulses. A dispatcher's calm voice spilled through a shoulder mic. "Secure the deck." A sergeant ordered, "Hands visible." Phones down. The crowd did not obey right away. Fear made them awkward, theatrical. Laughter had left and taken safety with it. Celeste stood silent, her blanket dark with water and blood, one hand still pressed against her ribs. The sea glass on her wrist shone like a small verdict. Isaac lay near the pool, coughing water and blood. His fine linen shirt looked like paper that had been burned and washed. A medic knelt beside him. "Name?" the medic asked. "Isaac." He rasped. "Last name?" "Warren." "Allergies." He blinked. "Help me." "We are," the medic said. "Stay still." Two officers approached Celeste with open palms. One was a woman, her badge catching the light. "Ma'am," hands where I can see them. Celeste lifted both. Blood traced the lines of her palms. "Are you injured?" "Yes." "Are you armed?" "No." "Step away from the door," the officer said, slowly. Celeste moved sideways into the open air. The hum of the pool pumps had fallen to a hush, like a chore. folding its last note. Another officer leaned over the glass wall and peered into the equipment room. Camera inside. He called out. The sergeant joined him. He saw the faint red eye of a recording light blink, then settle into standby. Unit 4 to tech. He said into his mic, "We have internal video. Flag for immediate preservation." "Copy," dispatch answered. The female officer stepped closer. "I'm Officer Lee. What's your name?" "Celeste." "Last name?" "Moore." Lee repeated it into her mic. "Multiple lacération. Conscious and coherent." "Sit her down," the sergeant said. "Get her covered." Someone draped a blanket over Celeste's shoulders. The wool scratched, steadying her anyway. She sat near the hedge that smelled of citrus and soil. A detective arrived last. She didn't run. She simply moved through the scene like someone cutting a straight path through confusion. Her badge read Rams. She crouched beside Celeste. "Detective Ramos," she said. "Can you breathe?" "Yes." "Do you need a medic?" "In a minute," Celeste said. "Evidence first." Ramos's mouth tilted slightly. "Tell me 2 facts." He pushed me. Celeste said, nodding at the pool. He said under a minute, "Second fact, there's a camera in the equipment room, and phones everywhere." Ramos stood. "Officer Lay." "Detective. Secure the plant room. Narrate everything." "Copy." Lee slid inside the equipment room with a medic's care. "Entering plant room," she said aloud for her body cam. "Chlorine smell. Reverse flow inactive. Emergency stop covered. Panel shows standby. Internal camera top left. Intact seal on USB port. Seal number 6287. Ramos nodded. "Good." At the pool's edge, another officer addressed the guests. "Phones," he said. "We'll need recordings, originals and cloud backups." A woman in green hesitated. "I have rights, also responsibilities," he said. "Calm. We can do this the easy way." A younger woman stepped out from the crowd, phone trembling in her grip. "I have the whole thing. From the wine spill." "Name?" "Janelle Ruiz." "Unlock." "Airplane mode." She obeyed. He mirrored her phone to a department tablet. Timestamp. 2020 18 hours. 49 minutes. 14 seconds. He read. Audio clear. An older guest stepped forward, shaking. "I recorded his fall, and what he said." She obeyed. Ramos asked. He said, "I poisoned the reef. I lied about the schedule." The words fell into the air like stones. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ramos' eyes narrowed. "Mark that file," she said to the officer. "It's our confession." At the pool, a crime scene tech photographed the notch Celeste had mentioned. Macro 1, Macro 2, swab collected. Tile fragment bag. Time 2020 18 hours 53 minutes. He said, each phrase crisp as a prayer. Another officer mirrored 3 more phone, reading the timestamps aloud. The red dots of their cameras blinked like tiny hearts. Ramos returned to Celeste. "Anything that will vanish if we don't capture it now." Celeste nodded toward the pool. "The great suction patterns. My blood. There's skin on the coping near the shallow end." Ramos signaled. "Lee, collect that." "Copy." A swab whispered across stone. A plastic bag sealed with a hiss. The tech initialed the label, careful block letters. Inside the plant room, Lee narrated the panel logs. Reverse flow on at 2020 18 hours 43 minutes. Stop at 49 minutes. Screen filmed. Model and firmware recorded. Ramos listened, satisfied. "Preserve that. It's our mechanical timeline." Celeste drew in a careful breath. "There are dumping records," she said. "Emails. I sent them to 3 environmental organizations 2 weeks ago." "Names?" Ramos asked. Celeste gave them. Ramos spoke into her mic. Officer Chen, contact those organizations. Preservation order now. Supoenas to follow. Copy. A voice came from another radio. Breaker box locked. No one's touched it. Camera has it in frame. Keep it that way. Ramos replied. The ambulance crew prepared Isaac for transport. He watched Celeste with the dull eyes of a man who had learned consequence too late. You did this, he whispered. No. Celeste said. You did. His breath hitched. The gurney rolled. The pool behind him lay flat. Innocent again. Ramos crouched beside Celeste. The medic cleaned the bite on her arm, wrapping it with gentle precision. We'll need a formal statement, Ramos said. Note under arrest. Not under arrest, Celeste repeated. But I'll tell you everything. Ramos nodded. Good. Start from the wine. Celeste spoke in fragments. The tray, the splash, the grip on her arm, the sentence about place, the phones, the push, the grate, the heel, the run, the panel, the logic, the fall, the words. Ramos did not interrupt. She recorded and gave quiet time stamps. 58, 59, 1 minute past midnight. When Celeste fell silent, Ramos's radio crackled again. The voice of dispatch came thin and final. Hash matches confirmed. Environmental crimes and attempted murder. This is federal. Ramos exhaled slowly. It just grew, she murmured. Celeste looked at her, not quite smiling. Good. The medic handed her a small carton of apple juice. Drink, he said. It tasted like childhood and metal. The ambulance door opened. Officer Lee gestured. Let's go. Celeste stood, blanket dragging behind her. She stepped into the vehicle's quiet. Outside, Ramos faced her body cam. Detective Lisa Hermus. Chain initiated at 18 hours 49 minutes. Civilian evidence preserved. Confession logged. Federal escalation confirmed. Victim transported for treatment under escort. The door slid shut. The ambulance rolled down the long drive. Celeste leaned her head against the cold wall and watched the mansion shrink to a pale dot between the trees. Streetlights passed across her reflection, like slow lightning. Her pulse slowed with them. The sea glass at her wrist caught each flash and held it for a breath. The image that came was not the pool. It was water over coral, sunlight fractured into coins, parrotfish biting old stone to make new sand. She had found her tide. Now she would ride it to the shore of the law. Fluorescents hummed like summer insects, and the station smelled of coffee grounds and wet wool. Celeste sat with a warmed blanket across her shoulders, tape bright against her forearm, where the medic had stitched the bites closed with narrow strips. The wall camera watched with its small red eye. Detective Ramos set a recorder down. The light flicked to green, and the room steadied around that patient glow. Names were said, rights were stated. Celeste gave the night back in an order that felt like threading a line through wet cloth. The tray, the splash, the sentence about place, the push, the cold, the stillness, the shoe, the heel, the run, the panel, the word she erased so the machine could speak, the heel, the fall, the confession, the stop. Ramos asked for intervals, and Celeste answered with breath lengths and the memory of a pulse in her neck, steady even when the room swayed. Officer Lee arrived in the doorway with clear bags that whispered. Inside lay a tile fragment the size of a thumbnail and a sealed tube with a swab like a clean bone. Plant room logs were filmed, panel times preserved, civilian phones mirrored, hashes matched. The clerk read from the hall, his voice careful, like he was laying glass. Ramos clicked off the recorder. The green eye cooled to dark. We have enough to move, she said. The hallway sparked with radio syllables. A judge had signed. Warrants lived now on paper and in the hands that would carry them. Federal had called back. Joint team inbound. The printer barked and spit, and a palm pressed a seal until the ink sank into the fibers. Doors thump. Shoes crossed tile. The building found a rhythm like a heart learning to beat for work. Lee pressed a paper cup into Celeste's hand. "Drink," she said. "Then I am redoing that dressing." The first sip tasted like cardboard and steam and steadiness. The second sip tasted like the inside of a winter morning and the inside of a cheap diner mug. Lee's hands were sure when she peeled away the wet tape. "Sicht." Clean adhesive whispered down. The sting felt honest. They moved her to a room with a couch and a blanket warmer and a narrow window that reflected a square of pale station light. She lay down without meaning to, just to lower her head for a breath, and woke to phones ringing in a softer key and a cup of water sweating on a napkin. Morning had shifted the color of the walls. The air smelled like toner and rain on asphalt. A dispatcher in a sweater that had seen long nights read out confirmations. The 3 organizations named had received her files 2 weeks ago. The chain was intact. Digital packages would arrive by secure line before the city shook itself fully awake. Drives would follow by courier. Ramos nodded to each fact and said thank you like sealing wax. The bullpen television bloomed with a building of glass catching pale pink. Jackets with 3 block letters crossed a lobby with the unremarkable pace of people who have done this before and will do it again. Dollies murmured down a hall. A gloved hand smoothed evidence tape and wrote the hour across it in deep, black. The camera tried for faces. It got wrists and seals instead. That felt right. Another screen split itself and showed the mansion gate banded with blue tape. A crawl at the bottom of the picture wrote a sentence again and again until it became a drumbeat. Billionaire party pool incident under federal review. In a corner window, a guest video froze on a frame where the water became a mouth, and a man understood the word consequence. Celeste's silhouette stood at the edge like a dark punctuation. She looked, then did not. The sea glass under her cuff cooled the inside of her wrist and measured her pulse without judging it. Officer Lee brought a paper bag stamped with a hospital logo and a handwritten apology. An egg sandwich wrapped in foil breathed warm butter. A yogurt cup lifted a mild sweetness that felt like an old-school morning. Celeste ate in small, clean bites. Her hands steadied one notch. She stood and pulled a soft shirt over clean skin. Her uniform lay folded in an evidence bag on a chair, damp and forgot. Celeste Moore was no longer the invisible woman. The bites on her arm were scars with a paper trail. Ramos spoke into a phone and into the space after the call ended. The board voted him out this morning. No one met his bail. She said, clipped, final. The sentence landed without echo. It did not need one. Power was a ladder. He had kicked a rung loose, and the ladder had learned gravity. A knock at the door, a stack of envelopes, a name badge from the federal side slid under with a card. Victim interview to be scheduled. Please confirm. Ramos took them, not Celeste. Later, the detective said, you need sleep more than you need a calendar. Lee added a hoodie, with a department emblem faded by hot dryers. Wear this if you want to pass as nobody, she said. It works better than it should. They led her past the bullpen to a quiet exit. Outside, the street had the damp shine of a city that had not dried yet. Reporters leaned at a barricade and threw questions like bright hooks. Lee walked at Celeste's side. A quiet wall. No comment, she said. Soft and identical, until voices thinned. The unmarked car's back seat was cool vinyl. The windows carried the city by in panes. A bus paused. A row of faces looked down at her without recognition. She looked back, not defiant and not ashamed, simply present, a person in a box with tape on her skin and a morning turning outside. Lee returned her phone. They had mirrored and secured it and cleaned out the water. The screen woke to messages stacked like shingles, names she had not spoken in years, unknown numbers, agents and books and shows, and the bright hum of a world that likes to devour a story and then ask for another. Celeste scrolled once, then placed the phone face down in her lap. Later, she said. Lee nodded. Later, they turned under an overpass where old leaks had drawn pale tide lines on concrete. Celeste watched the marks slide overhead and thought of the pipe that had carried poison to a place that had not asked for it. She thought of her mother rinsing dishes under a thin stream and turning the faucet off quick to save a little. She thought of Sarah's hand, lifting a shard of sea glass to the sun, and laughing at how the light went inside it and could not get out. The car stopped in front of her brick building. Paint, onions, warmed laundry. A mat by a neighbor's door promised welcome in a font that was too cheerful for stairs. Ramos put a card in her palm. "Call me before you call anyone else," she said. "If they knock, do not open." "They who?" Celeste asked. "Everyone," Ramos said. Not unkind. Her apartment let her in with the familiar click of a lock that worked if you turned it just so. Plants bent toward a thin slice of morning. A mug waited by the sink. A book lay face down where she had left it a week ago. A receipt holding the page like a small tongue. She stood in the center and let the quiet thicken. Her phone buzzed once. A text from a federal number confirmed the interview and thanked her for her courage in language that had been approved by someone who approved language. Another text from an environmental group confirmed digital integrity and chain. Another asked for exclusive rights and a morning couch and a smile shaped like story. Celeste set the phone down and let them be. The television told its own story even on mute. Agents in hallways, boxes sealed and rolled, a door opening onto a small room where a shredder paused with a folder halfway to its mouth and a hand stopped it, firm and ordinary. A headline at the bottom of a different channel pulled hard with two words made to live side by side now. Racketeering. Environmental. There was a knock. Not press. Lee again, holding a paper bag and a folder, clothes from evidence. She said, "Clean replacements." And a form. The form was a release for contact and a line for a signature that would keep other people away and let the right ones in. Celeste signed. The pen carved a small burr in the paper. Lee watched the loop of the last letter and nodded. "Get sleep," she said. "We begin again when the sun is higher." When the door closed, Celeste rested her forehead against it. For a long breath, the wood was cool and smooth, and not pretending to be anything, it was not. She turned the tap until steam rose, and washed the pool from her hair and the night from her skin. Water ran pink, then less, then only water. The mirror fogged and cleared, and left her face exactly where she had put it. She pulled on soft cotton and the hoodie with the tired emblem. The couch was too far. The bed would pull her under for a day. She sat on the floor with her back to the wall and let her legs stretch. The boards were cool. A tiny thread of dust lifted and fell in the light like a small tide. On the muted screen, a hand stretched tape over a box lid and wrote the hour and initials. A courthouse door took a flash, and then another, preparing for a day to open at last. Ramos's voice came back to her as if the room had held it for her. "The board voted him out this morning. No one met his bail." The sentence landed and stayed. Celeste lowered her eyes to the sea glass and touched it with 2 fingers. The cool traveled up her veins and made a small, steady harbor At her wrist, she breathed in for a slow count and out for the same, the way a swimmer accepts the length of a lane and lets the wall arrive instead of chasing it. Sleep found her the way tide finds shore, without hurry, without apology. She did not dream of teeth. She dreamed of a reef where poison had not reached today. She dreamed of a friend, laughing in a light that the water broke into coins. She dreamed of a gavel that sounded less like a hammer and more like a metronome, finally matching her heart. Morning thinned from gray to a pale rinse, and the courthouse woke like a ship turning its engines. Celeste stood at her sink long enough for steam to smooth the night from her hands. The hoodie carried a quiet laundry smell and a thread of city air. Her phone hummed across the table. She let the sound pass. When Detective Ramos called, her voice was low and steady, a voice built for rooms with microphones. "First appearance," she said. "You do not have to come. I am coming." Celeste answered, and the quiet that followed felt like the door of a courtroom swinging inward. The steps outside the building were their own weather. Coats hissed, cameras breathed, and the bailiff's radio ticked once before falling silent as he held the heavy door. Inside, Marble lifted the light and laid it back in calm squares. Celeste's shoes made small sounds on the stone, and she refused the pull of memory toward pool tile and wet glass. Ramos met her beneath a frame of posted rules. Officer Lee a half step back. Posture like a promise. Sit when I touch. Breathe always. Ramos murmured. Celeste nodded. The sea glass at her wrist tapped once where pulse met skin, as if asking for the first line of a day. Wood and silence arranged themselves into order. A clock hummed above the seal. The court reporter placed her fingers without looking, and the room grew still around their waiting data.com. The judge entered without ceremony. Everyone rose and sat like a single organism exhaling. They brought Isaac through the side door, and the color of his jumpsuit did not fit the architecture or the life he had chosen. The room felt the mismatch. He searched for faces he could use and found none. He found Celeste last. A flinch crossed his mouth and tried to be anger and failed. Charges were read in a cadence that belonged to weather reports and ship logs. Attempted murder, conspiracy, environmental crimes, fraud, bribery. Words with weight and teeth. Fines would not matter. Time would. The prosecutor stood with his sleeves plain and his voice like clear glass. Remand. Your Honor, flight risk. Intimidation, risk. We have recordings. Admissions, chain. The page turned with a small sound that felt like a gear engaging. The defense offered nouns meant to soften. Community ties. Misunderstanding. A party gone wrong. Accident wilted in his mouth. Reason slid away from him like water. The judge listened with hands folded and eyes as steady as a ledger line. The videos alone make the risk unmistakable. She said, "Bail is denit." The gavel did not slam. It arrived, like a mark made with a good pen. A hearing date took its place on a calendar. Motions would braid behind it. The room breathed, then emptied, and the hallway took the sound as if it had been waiting. Outside, cameras learned new questions. Celeste did not teach them answers. She stood in the thin winter sunlight like a swimmer on the deck between heats, breathing for the next length. "You did not have to be here," Lee said. "I did," Celeste said. A boy pushed a scooter with one loose wheel across the square. Grin bright as new metal. The sky was the color of nickel. The weeks that followed measured themselves in filings and interviews, and the slow, technical courage of building truth into a shape that could stand under cross-examination. Celeste returned to the station when asked. Federal badges came with their practiced quiet. She walked the tightrope of memory without looking down and without dramatics. She offered times in breath lengths and steps, and whenever her voice wanted to rise, she set it back on the rail of fact. Evidence arrived in sealed boxes and in airless transfers, where hashes matched and screens nodded. Panel logs played like a metronome. Reverse on, stop. Internal camera footage offered pump, hum, and shoe scrape, and the metallic voice of a system reporting status like prayer. Civilian phones delivered angles the room did not know it needed, each one holding a red recording icon like a witness who would not forget. The sentence that had ripped itself loose in panic repeated across devices until it was no longer a surprise and not yet less true. I poisoned the reef. I lied about the schedule. The prosecutor built a spine from these vertebra by vertebra. Jury selection began on a Monday that tasted of rain and new paper. Celeste sat with her hands folded and let the room choose. People stood and were thanked and released. People stood and stayed. The 12 who remained looked like a cross-section of tide lines and school buses and unremarkable kitchens where bills get paid on a Thursday night. She decided not to memorize their faces. It would not change the words she would say when it was time. Opening statements ran like two rivers in different weather. The prosecutor placed exhibits like stones you could cross on. Exhibit 1. The mirrored file with an embedded timestamp in frame and a clock in the background that agreed. Exhibit 2. The plant room logs. Exhibit 3. The panel video. You will see, he said, that imagination is not required. The defense asked for what if and perhaps and sentiment dressed as doubt, inviting the jury to close their eyes. They did not. When they called her, the clerk swore Celeste in, and the chair turned her body into a microphone. The prosecutor opened doors in the order the night had offered them, and she stepped through without rush. She crossed the deck and fell, and counted her breath. She chose stillness. She found the grate. She used a shoe. She ran. She reversed the current and then shut it down. She watched a man slip in his own weather and confess to a camera that had not asked his permission, her voice held to the lane line of fact. The jury watched her mouth, then looked past her to the rectangle of cold light, where the phone video rolled, the red icon pulsing, the wall clock agreeing, the room's own air counting along. The prosecutor let silence do the arithmetic. On cross, the defense tried to pry the word mercy from the hinges. Why reverse the current? "Too live," she said. "To stop the frenzy he wanted. You could have left it on." "I did not." "You could have left it off." "He pushed me into a tank he curated and called it a lesson," she said. "I did not build the room. I used it." He dangled anger as bait. She did not bite. "The logic is the mercy," she said, and the sentence sat in the air without apology. Other witnesses lifted the edges. Detective Ramos walked the chain like a person carrying glass through a crowded room. Officer Lee narrated the plant room video and recited seal numbers with the precision of coordinates. A fisherman spoke of nets that came up empty and of a smell you cannot wash off. A teacher said her students drew gray turtles until white boots and barrels arrived. And then they began to draw green again. Closing arguments arrived like the line of a storm you can see from far water. The prosecutor's hands stayed quiet at his sides. There are rooms built for amusement by men who believe the ocean is theirs to reroute. He said, there are also laws. He asked for nothing but attention to the line they had drawn together. The defense tried to braid sympathy and doubt, and found his hands empty. He asked the jury to forgive what had been recorded. He asked for imagination to outrun a timestamp. The judge read instructions with a tone that refused to become a character. The jury left, the room thin. Celeste counted 8 breaths and then another 8, then stopped counting because numbers have no power over time when doors are closed. They returned with faces set to purpose. The clerk asked the form. The foreperson answered with the steady rhythm of a practiced line: guilty on attempted murder, guilty on environmental crimes, guilty on conspiracy, guilty on bribery, and on fraud. Each word landed like a measured hammer on an anvil that had waited for this exact impact. The scar on Celeste's forearm throbbed once and then settled into stillness. Sentencing came on a day that left a sheen of heat on the railing. Celeste wore a dress that did not ask anything of the room. Isaac stood thinner and older, a person cut loose from his prop house. His lawyer spoke of childhood and boards and charity. The prosecutor spoke of pipes and logs and arithmetic. You cannot charm. Victims' statements bent the room toward water and work. The judge faced Isaac without malice. The law is not a tide you can buy, she said. It is a line that keeps water from taking everything. Years were named, enough to change a life. Restitution carried commas that would fund remediation, and the people who had learned a chemical smell. Orders seized assets that once posed as future and status. The gavel fell without flourish, and the sound walked Celeste's bones like a slow drum finishing a march. Outside, the square erupted into its noisy weather. Reporters tried to turn satisfaction into performance. Celeste did not give them the extra note. She stood with Ramos and Lee and let heat touch the pale marks on her arm. A child lifted a finger and whispered to his mother. The mother looked and did not take out her phone. Now begins the work that does not make television, Ramos said quietly. Permits, remediation, funds that move where they are written to move. Are you ready? Celeste looked up at a blue that felt like a door opening. Yes, she said, and the words sat clean in her mouth. That evening her apartment held a softer air. She turned the television to a channel that showed late light on water instead of faces. The sea glass caught the day's last color. She made tea that smelled like grass and heat, and sat on the floor because chairs are for when you forget you have legs. Her phone buzzed once. A message from a foundation she had admired when she was a student invited a conversation about investigations and advocacy. Others would follow. She did not need to choose that night. She opened her notebook and wrote 3 short lines. Not poetry, a list. Chain of proof, chain of care, chain of repair. She said each phrase quietly and let them settle in the room like furniture set in its right place. She rested her fingers on the glass at her wrist and felt the small harbor there. This time, she chose the current. Morning came soft as breath on glass. The trial had emptied itself out of the news cycle. The square outside the courthouse had gone back to pigeons and buses, and the city exhaled. Celeste woke in an apartment that smelled of steam and paper and basil, not of fear. The band of sea glass on her wrist caught a sliver of pale sun and held it without cutting. She made coffee with hands that no longer shook. The cup was chipped along one lip, a familiar fault line. It did not look like damage anymore. It looked like proof that some things endure. Down on the street, vendors rolled carts across wet pavement, and a school bell rang like a tide turning around a jetty. Ramos had told her to rest. Lee had insisted. Rest felt like a verb for other people. Celeste opened the laptop that had once held rent notices and job applications. Its desktop carried 3 folders with names as clean as new paper. Evidence, reef data, restoration. The message from the foundation still waited, steady and unrushed. Your insight would be invaluable. It said, help track illegal dumping routes. Help rebuild what was taken. She typed a single line and left no room for doubt. I will help. Not as a witness, as a worker. She sent it before courage could cool. Weeks later, she stood by the ocean again. A colder coast, a thinner wind. The field station was glass and cedar, perched above a small cove. Salt clung to every hinge. The air tasted like metal and beginnings. A badge on a lanyard touched her collarbone with each step. Environmental Investigation Division. Her name beneath. In neat black, it felt less like a title and more like a weather report. The station gave her new rhythms. Morning briefings in a room that smelled like coffee and brine. Sample runs along a shore scalloped by winter storms. Drone footage that stitched currents into visible language. The pump room throbbed with the low heartbeat of filtration. The sound still snagged at old nerves. So she stood in the doorway each afternoon and breathed until it became background hum. On her second week, the lead biologist handed her a small tank. 2 juvenile turtles floated inside. Shells tagged with rescue marks. Their eyes were old and clear. They will remember kindness before they remember pain, the biologist said. Celeste nodded. So would she. At dusk, she walked the strand after the others left. The tide set down gifts and took them back again. A curl of coral, a sliver of green bottle worn soft as a thumbprint, a shell cracked into the shape of a crooked heart. She left them where the water had placed them. Witnessing was a kind of care. News arrived like weather fronts. Warren Industries unspooled and dissolved. Federal funds moved through channels with names longer than headlines. Lawmakers advanced a bill for coastal protection with language lifted from her case. A university announced scholarships in Sarah's name. Celeste watched the ceremony on a small screen at her desk. A speaker lifted a piece of sea glass to the light. For a breath, the room turned into an aquarium of gold. Months layered themselves into something that looked like a life. She moved from analysis to outreach. She stood in classrooms and explained how pollution travels like rumor, slow and unstoppable unless named. She used the tone she had learned on the stand. Short sentences, no decoration. She did not say the name Isaac. She said systems and choices and the cost of silence. Children listen the way people do when they recognize a survivor, even if they do not know the story. The foundation grew teeth. An old municipal pool was refitted into a rehabilitation tank for turtles. Celeste visited during the conversion and knelt beside the basin while crews sealed seams. The glass came from retired aquariums, curved and scarred by years of holding lives. Her reflection looked back older, steadier, not sorry. A worker held up a draft for a plaque. In memory of those who fought to surface, she read it once more and nodded. It was right. Release day began under a heavy red sun that made everything feel like a confession. Volunteers lined the sand with cameras lowered. The turtles went down in carriers. Their flippers pressed small crescents into wet shore. The smallest paused at the lace of foam like someone thinking before a door. Celeste crouched and spoke barely above the water. Go when you are ready. The tide lifted the shell just enough. The turtle slid forward into color and vanished in a thread of silver bubbles. The crowd exhaled as if a single lung. A few cameras clicked once, then stopped. The moment did not need backlighting. That night she sat alone in her office and opened a ledger that did not balance in the old way. Restitution funds had been routed by law into cleanup crews and community labs. The numbers did not feel like revenge. They felt like a scale, finally, at level. She let the columns steady her. The world had found a kind of accounting. Her phone hummed. A message from Ramos. Reef footage goes public tonight. Do you want to watch early? Celeste looked out through the dark windows at the square glow of the tanks. No, she wrote. Let them watch. The ocean speaks louder than I can. Ramos sent one word in return. Proud. She left the lights off and walked the dock. Boards creaked under her steps like old memory that had lost its sharpness. The air carried salt and disinfectant, both cleaner now. She slid the sea glass band from her wrist and held it against the seam where night met water. Light moved through it like a small heartbeat. Sarah would have laughed. She thought Sarah would have said, "See, even the broken pieces bend light." This piece had done its job. Celeste smiled, small and real. She let the glass fall into the water. It sank without a splash, heavy with memory but light with purpose, joining the tide where stories go when they are finished telling themselves. Letters began to find her desk. A teacher sent a photograph of a class releasing a basket of hatchling. A fisherman wrote with careful penmanship that his nets no longer came up smelling like a chemistry set. A child drew a turtle touching a woman's hand and wrote beneath it in wide, blue marker. She made the water better. Celeste pinned the picture above her screen. It mattered more than any verdict. When spring warmed the air, she went back to the estate that had once been an address for fear the government had seized it and signed it over to a coastal trust. The marble still shone, but grass had pushed through the cracks with a quiet insistence. The pool that had been a stage for cruelty now held rescue tanks. Water moved under a surface of soft ripples. Celeste placed her palm against the glass. A turtle rose and bumped her fingers, shell ridged where scars had set. The motion felt like gratitude and absolution joined. She walked the paths alone. The roses smelled like rain on stone instead of chlorine and perfume. Laughter did not live in the corners. Ghosts had learned other rooms. At the gate she looked back once. Sunlight struck water and turned it to hammered gold. Then she let the door close behind her. With an ordinary click, that evening she spoke in a lecture hall whose fluorescent buzz she remembered from another life. The same room that had once tried to make her small now carried her voice without argument. Her words rose over the rustle of notebooks. "Survival chooses you," she said. "Justice is choosing back. The work does not end at a verdict. It ends when the system protects what cannot protect itself." In the last row, a professor who had once dismissed her proposal sat very straight and nodded, his eyes fixed on the authority in her posture. The applause was gentle, not loud, the sound of people agreeing to a task. Afterward, the campus smelled of damp earth and sap. A student approached with a jar of sea glass collected during shore cleanups. "Would you pick one?" she asked. Celeste lifted the jar and watched the lamplight move through green and amber and milk white. She chose a pale shard and held it up so the light turned soft in its belly. "Keep it," she said. "Let it remind you that the water remembers." Night settled like linen. Somewhere beyond the library roofs the ocean shifted and sighed. For the first time in a long span, she did not brace against the sound. She let it fill her the way breath does. When there is no fear of drowning, the tide would leave and return. So would she? She walked toward the street. Her shadow moved easy beside her. Her steps were quiet and certain. Behind her, the ocean kept speaking in the only tense it knows, forward. And in the steady cadence of that speech, she heard not survival anymore but continuation. The current had turned, and she was steering why. The morning air at the coastal center tasted like salt and solder. Cables lay in tidy runs across the exhibition hall, their tape edges warmed smooth by passing shoes. The glass of the old pool caught pale light and threw a quiet lattice on the ceiling. Celeste stood in the aisle with a coil of nerves settling into work. Today would not be a courtroom. Today would be a reveal in the clean sense. Tools on the table, lines connected, nothing left for rumor to invent. A technician rolled a cart past. Two projectors blinked awake. The low breath of the rehab pumps joined the deeper hum from the servers under the stage. She felt the old catch in her ribs at that sound, and let it pass through. like weather through a screen. She had learned the frequency where fear fades and purpose registers. Detective Ramos arrived in a navy blazer that looked like it had never needed luck. Officer Lee brought a canvas case with seals intact. They nodded, like people used to standing beside evidence rather than flowers. Celeste nodded back. In her palm sat 3 small drives inside tamper bags. Red seals unbroken, the handwriting on their labels square and patient. Her wrist felt light, where the sea glass band used to rest. The skin there wore a thin crescent of pale. She touched it once. Habit, not need. The hall filled the way. Tide fills a cove. Students with notebooks, coastline residents in work jackets, journalists who had learned to angle their lenses down when turtles were carried past. A bank of cameras at the rear blinked their red eyes and waited. The banner above the stage carried a simple line in black: Ocean Justice Initiative. Open data. Open law. A stagehand whispered from the wings. 5 minutes. Celeste breathed the scent of steel truss and seawater and walked toward the podium. She had never liked podiums. This one was clear, like a window newly washed. The fear of being seen was gone, replaced by the necessity of being heard. She stepped behind it anyway. The microphone checked with a soft thump that ran across her sternum and steadied there. The first slide glowed on the screen. The coast, smoothed by a satellite's distant eye, currents drawn in faint arrows, the color of rain. Data wanted a voice, not a sermon, a spine. "Good morning," she said. Her sound carried without effort. "We are going to show you where the water goes, and who sent what into it, and how we know." The map brightened. Animated plumes unrolled like pale smoke on their sides. A simple legend walked along the bottom in careful letters, naming the kinds of poison as plainly as you would name wind or rain. The room's hush deepened. She kept her sentences short. "Currents do not care about fences. Waste does not ask permission. We traced it." She lifted the first drive, the bag crackling. "Mirror 1. Hash verified." She read the seal name and the line of characters aloud. Ramos answered, received, and wrote it on the chain form with the date and her initials. Lee matched the digits and set her signature under it. The projector showed the hash as a long, quiet code, not for drama, but for proof. The tech mirrored the drive to the display. A night map appeared with points of light sliding along a shipping lane like beads on a string. She let the image sit. "These are vessel tracks," she said. "Now wind, now tide." A second layer flowed in. The plumes bent toward the sanctuary like a hand held over a flame. A murmur moved across the room. Not outrage, recognition. She did not use the name of the man whose parties had once turned harm into theater. She used time, late night and 13 minutes. She said, "Wind from the northeast, light and steady." A small video inset opened, a shore camera far and fixed. A wake in dark water, a smear of brightness where nothing should have moved. She tapped the next key. An information pane bloomed on the right. The words read, "Unedited. Make. Model." The place and the moment stamped by the device that had seen them. The data answered before anyone could ask whether a human might be lying. Ramos accepted the second drive. Seal read. Signature drawn. A new layer appeared. Plant logs from the next town down current. A man in the 4th row cursed softly and covered his mouth as if the word could bruise the screen. Celeste stepped from the podium for the Tide demo. An acrylic flume waited on a waist-high table, half full of clear water. A small pump hummed. 3 droppers rested in a tray. She poured salt water from a labeled jug and flicked the pump to change direction. "Calm motion confuses predators," she said. Hearing the old lecture hall in her own cadence, chaos redirects them. The ocean receives poison the same way. She dripped a thin line of blue into the running water. For a breath it held straight, then the reversal pulled it sideways and down. Carrying it around a foam model of a reef, the model clouded. The audience leaned closer. Human instinct to witness damage and learn the path it takes. From the back, a young voice. How do we stop it? Not angry, practical, like a hand reaching for a wrench. With law, Celeste said, and with light, she clicked to the next slide. A scan of stamped orders filled the screen. The judge's name masked, the corners marked with dark seals. The camera over her shoulder caught the gloss of paper. We now require real-time disclosures for discharges. We have placed sensors where there were none. We are not asking, we are measuring. A shot of a buoy rolled in, yellow and modest, a plastic collar peppered with small windows. A kid in the front row pointed at it like something had just invented itself. Lee set a stainless cylinder on the table, a clear lid showing a sensor pack, and a tiny card inside, like a heart. Unit 1, she said. Pulled 11 days ago. Chain held. The tech eased the card into a reader. The projector drew a line of readings that ran like a pulse, numbers for acidity and conductivity, and a sudden ugly peak that quieted 2 hours after a warrant landed on a desk. The room learned to trust cause and effect again. Faces softened. A fisherman whose hands looked like old rope closed his eyes and breathed like air. Had weight again. Questions. Celeste said. Hands went up. She chose a woman in a windbreaker, still damp at the cuffs. Will there be criminal charges for the other firms? Not fines. Charges. Investigations are active, Ramos said from below the stage, standing to answer rather than to command. We do not predict. We build. We brought you here to see exactly how. A student asked about work. How do I do this without burning out? Celeste gave a list rather than a slogan. Keep the lines short in your hand. Keep your sentences shorter. Let the data speak before you do. Go look at a tide chart when nothing makes sense. A boy in a soccer hoodie asked whether turtles remember people. Celeste smiled without trimming it. I think they remember touch, she said. Ours tap the glass if you stand still. Laughter moved through the hall like a small wave. Shoulders lowered. Yaus unclenched. The last drive lay warm in her palm. Final layer, she said. Cash flows to shells. The slide gave them a plain tree of boxes and arrows. A bank record at one corner. A foundation with a sweet name at another. Dates along the lines like ticks on a metronome. She did not gild it. She pointed to 3 matched crossings that stood over 3 discharges. If you are exhausted by the pattern, that means you are seeing it. Lee read the seal. Ramos signet. The board behind them became a single body, lighter than a courtroom, and as focused. The cameras rolled. Somewhere, a small ticker turned a quiet gear. She closed with no flourish. We will post this, she said. Every frame, every log, every hash. We will take your tips. We will teach your classes. We will show up when the tide is right and when it is wrong. She looked past the lights to the back row, where a student held a jar of beach glass like a lantern. We do not own the ocean. We owe it. Ramos nodded slowly, her hand resting on the chain form. The paper now an instrument of public education, as much as law. Applause rose and did not spike. It held a steady amplitude like wind on a clean day. In the corner, the rehab filter sighed. Celeste let the sound land and take nothing with it. After the session, the hall broke into small knots around maps and the flume. People thanked her in ways that sounded like they were thanking the same thing in themselves. An older fisherman handed her a folded paper, names and dates written with care. They think we do not see the night, he said. She gave him a card with a single address. Send them, she said. We will treat each name like glass. Ramos moved in at her elbow with the economy of someone who dislikes being thanked and gets it anyway. Media will cut this into 3 minutes, she said, but the raw stays raw. We will make them watch the long version. Celeste looked at the rehab tank where a turtle traced a slow oval like a thought. We will outlast clips, she said. Lee had 3 teachers lined up by the flume. She explained dye and reversal, while a student filmed her hands instead of her face. The kid would go home and see their sink differently. That counted. Late light pushed through the old pool glass in long bars. Celeste stepped outside, into air that tasted like rain held at a distance. The lawn sloped to the seawall, where low waves flexed and fell. She leaned on the warm stone. A gull landed 3 paces away, and considered her with a bright eye. The breeze carried the faintest echo of traffic, and the near sound of water working on its own time. Her phone buzzed. A message from the foundation director, numbers that looked like breath, grants closed, sensors funded. A mobile lab ordered. 2 interns from the town down current accepted. She read each line twice, not from doubt, but to feel the weight of the commas like pebbles in a pocket she would not lose. She glanced back at the hall through the glass. The last slide listed download links, each with a checksum like a signature. She pictured a kitchen table in a house, with salt on the window, a parent and a child clicking those links and learning to read water the way you learn to read a clock. A small voice behind her, "You promised turtles." A girl in a yellow raincoat stood with her mother at the path, eyes wide, at the thought of magic. Celeste knelt so they were level. "We do not touch," she said, "but we can watch if we stand very still." They went in together. At the glass, one turtle rose and tapped once, then drifted like a leaf. The child's mouth made a silent "oh." The mother's hand tightened on a strap and then loosened. Evening met them on the way out with a rush of cool. The hall lights dimmed by degrees. The servers clicked like patient insects. Celeste stopped under the banner and touched the corner where the grommet had rubbed the vinyl smooth. Simple, sturdy, no drama. Her phone vibrated again. A note from a university coordinator. A guest lecture slot had opened in the same hall, where a professor had once waved her off with a thin smile. "Are you available?" The note said. She smiled and typed, "Yes. We will bring students from the shore. We will let them speak. Send a bus." On the seawall the wind freshened. She breathed in and out, and counted the way swimmers count. Not because she needed to calm herself, but because counting marked the distance she had already come and the length she would take next. The world smelled like wet stone and possibility. She set her palm to the glass for a breath, then let it fall. Work again tomorrow. Maps to post, names to protect, lines to draw clean enough that even those trying not to see would have to squint against the light. The ocean spoke in its one tense, "forward." The pumps hummed. No longer a threat, only a tool. She turned toward the door with the calm of someone who had learned to steer without white knuckles. Behind her a turtle rose, and touched the surface with the smallest sound a room can hold. Justice signed in quiet water. The email arrived at first light, with a subject line so plain it meant everything. Hearing agenda posted. Industry challenge scheduled. Celeste read it by the lab window, a thin ribbon of coffee warming her breath. Outside, the rehab tanks shifted from night to morning. Pumps exhaled. She counted the hum to 4, and to 4 again, and felt the nerves slide into a lane she trusted. Upstairs, the conference room smelled like paper and damp wool. Charts occupied the walls in straight rows. A printer worked in quick bursts that sounded like rain on tin. Ramos stood at the far end, blazer neat, eyes clear. Lee set a line of tamper bags like a small parade at attention. The foundation director pushed a legal pad across the table, a list built of verbs: file, publish, serve. Celeste sat with her spine straight and her hands quiet on her knees. Today they will try to freeze the rule, Ramos said. We show cause, we show chain. She glanced toward Celeste, the ghost of a smile, anchored by work. And we show discipline. Keep your answers short. Keep your lungs longer. Copy, Lee said. She lifted a stainless cylinder from its cradle and tapped the lid like a trusted instrument. Sensor 2's card sits in bag 6. The hash matches last night's upload. She read the string aloud, even and sure. The foundation tech echoed each piece against a blue screen. A small green light blinked once, as if a heart had found its rhythm. They rehearsed the sequence. Mid-morning at the State House, industry counsel would argue that the disclosure rule exceeded what the statute allowed. They would call the sensors unreliable and the maps hysterical. Celeste would not use the name of the man already sentenced. She would say time and tide and data. She would not let anger annotate a number. They moved. The van doors thumped shut. Gulls rode the onshore wind like small kites made of bone. The highway traced a border between dark water and bright billboards. Celeste watched the breakers tally themselves. Long division solved in foam. She breathed, slow and even. She thought of Sarah, then of the reef, then of the metronome she carried now in her chest. The State House chamber gathered sound like a shell. Lawmakers shuffled paper and glanced down at screens. Staffers whispered in tiny weather bursts. Industry council sat in a tight cluster of dark cloth like a featherless flock. On the back wall, teachers in windbreakers and a fisherman with cap and years pressed their shoulders square. Cameras blinked their patient red eyes and waited. The air held varnish and wool and the last of the morning rain. The badge on her lanyard clicked when she stood. She had never liked podiums. Now she used them as relays. She took one breath. "Good morning," she said. The microphone carried her voice without swelling it. "Currents do not care about fences. Waste does not ask permission. We traced it." A screen lowered with a soft motor whine. The coast appeared, veins of pale blue marking motion. She kept her sentences short. The way a courtroom had taught her body. "These are vessel tracks," she said. "Night, outbound. Here is wind, here is tide." Animated plumes bent toward the sanctuary, like an invisible hand had closed around them. She let the image sit. The room leaned with it. Industry council rose like a polished wave. A man with careful hair and a blade of a tie smiled without warmth. "With respect," he said, "these are simulations. Pretty weather for people who like pictures. Your sensors are uncalibrated. Any rule based on this kind of citizen science lacks legal ground." Lee lifted a tamper bag. "Evidence 6, she said. The seal number sounded like a small hymn sung straight. She slit the top, slid the card to the reader. Numbers breathed across the screen. Calibration logs included. She added, "Time stamped. Mirrored to the public repository last night. Hash verified." Another screen answered with the same proof in quiet text. Ramos read from a printed form and pressed a stamp until the paper thudded like a small thunderclap. Counsel tried a different lane. "And your lead witness," he said, tilting his chin at Celeste, with the ease of entitlement, "lacks environmental certification. She is a maid who—" Ramos did not look away from the board. "She is an investigator whose testimony survived cross, appeal, and sentencing," she said. "Stay with the rule." "Counsel." The chair lifted her palm. A woman with a tired face that could still cut straight. "We will keep to scope," she said, voice low and gravel warm. It pinned the room to the work. Industry rolled their own slides. A consultant smiled like a television anchor and gestured at a model in blues too bright to be true. "As you can see," he said, "the alleged plumes disperse harmlessly in open water. The proposed requirements impose catastrophic costs with no measurable benefit." He tapped a screen. A new graphic bloomed. Counsel relaxed into his chair, a tilt used by men who believe the room belongs to them again. "In your model," Celeste asked, "what salinity did you assign the receiving waters?" "A seam pot, standard coastal values," he said. "Which standard?" she asked. "And at what depth?" "Average," he said. "Mid-column." Lee tapped the keyboard to call up their own sensor line. "Our readings show fresher surface layers after rain," she said. "Lower density. Surface plumes ride farther and bend faster. Your mid-column model loses the very path you claim to trace." She clicked. The screen split. On the left, the consultant's gentle cloud dissolved. On the right, the real plume cut along shore like a rumor with a destination. The chair's eyebrows moved the length of a breath. For a second, the chamber considered learning. Counsel tried force. "The censors were trespass," he said, "placed without authority at municipal outfalls. We will seek an injunction." Ramos's mouth almost smiled. "They were installed under a municipal pilot consent order," she said, holding up a copy that shone like an old coin. "Signed, you can file a letter. The court will want facts." The hearing slid toward the moment every day like this keeps in its pocket. The chair looked at the clock as if it owed her. "We will take final statements," she said. Counsel offered one more measure of polish. "This is a case of activists with art," he said. "The economy cannot run on feelings. This is not art," Celeste said. "It is water recorded by machines that do not know my name." She nodded to the fisherman in the back row. "It is taste in a local mouth. It is a spike on a chart at the hour a particular pipe ran at night. It is a buoy, speaking the only language it has, and it is the law you wrote, applied as written." The chair leaned a fraction forward and set the point. "The petition to stay the rule is denied," she said. "We proceed." Celeste thought of the sea glass she had released. The last, perfect throw. Sound rushed out of the room then, like air leaving a lung that had held too long. Reporters stood. Somewhere a pencil snapped. A teacher cried once, softly. Counsel's jaw clicked at the hinge, a sound that read as arrogance and smelled like fear. Outside, coastal wind cut through wool and damp hair. Cameras gathered without crowding. Celeste did not hold a press conference. She stood under a slate sky and let the microphones record 2 lines. "We will post the full record," she said. "If you have tips or maps in your pocket, bring them." Back at the center, the afternoon bent toward useful. A mobile lab rolled into the yard like a small ship. Students unloaded boxes of reagent and new collars for the buoys. Lee trained 3 teachers at the flume, her hands sure over dye, her sentences trimmed to bone. Ramos finished forms with a coffee gone cold and earned it. The printer spit a new page with a heavier sound, a federal order denying industry's emergency motion. The director pinned it to the board with a blue tack. The room breathed. The pumps kept humming, steady as a calm heart. Twilight pooled in the corners, while files climbed the server like careful steps. Each entry wore its checksum like a passport, and its picture data like a name. The download page lengthened by inches. The rack clicked. Patient, content with slow work that mattered. Celeste stepped outside with a coil of sensor line on her shoulder. The air tasted like copper and rain. At the seawall she paused. Low waves murmured at the stone. A gull hung in the wind and turned a bright eye as if checking her math. She thought of a pool that had become a tank, that had become a lesson. She thought of a vigil of phones that had become a dataset. She thought of a word that once made her small and now simply described a job: help. Her phone buzzed. A community group down current had sent a bundle of photographs, each file named with place and day, each frame flat and careful like testimony. She opened one and saw a dark slick where no slick should be, a red navigation light, reflected and broken in a way her body knew before her mind did. She forwarded the set to intake and typed 2 words: good eyes. Night drew a clean line between work and the soft sound of water against stone. She returned inside and set the coil on the bench. Lee checked clasps on a case by muscle memory. Ramos locked a cabinet, the key heavy in her palm before it slid into a pocket. The director leaned back, spine popping gently, and looked like someone who had picked up a boulder and found a door. They gathered by the rehab glass without planning to. A turtle rose and tapped once, then drifted, its motion as certain as a clock. The hall lights fell to a second setting. Their reflections floated across the dark panel and the green pulse below. What next? Lee asked. Not a test, simply a line. We do not sprint. Celeste said. We keep the metronome. We put a sensor where they do not want a witness. We teach the kid who already knows the smell. She turned to Ramos. You build the case the way tides build a line, unarguable because it keeps arriving. Ramos nodded once. Charges will travel, she said. They always do when people stop being scared of the work. Celeste looked at the simple acrylic podium near the door and understood that the strongest tool was not a statute, but a fact told plainly. They stood a breath longer, then peeled off to their lists. Later, at her desk, the inbox showed new messages, and the tip counter rose like a tide table. She opened a blank document and typed 3 phrases at the top: a promise made when the verdict landed, chain of proof, chain of care, chain of repair. She saved it inside a folder now named Work, where evidence had once lived alone. She shut the laptop and listened. The pumps sang their low note. A printer coughed and went quiet. A door closer sighed and clicked with the small certainty she liked more than any speech. She gathered her jacket and stepped into night that smelled like wet rope and possibility. On the seawall she paused. The ocean spoke in its one tense. Forward. She answered the only way swimmers do, turning at the wall and pushing clean. Not because she was chaste, but because distance had become a promise she meant to keep. Dawn came the color of unripe limes, the bay wearing a thin skin of light. Celeste woke before her alarm and knew the day without names for it. Work and witness. She lay still and listened as the building found its breath. A pipe ticked. A kettle sighed. A truck exhaled its brakes and rolled on. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and pressed her thumb lightly to the pale seam along her forearm. The old ache answered not with pain but with memory, then settled. She stood. At the center, the air smelled of wet rope and iodine. The pumps sang their patient low note. Hall lights lifted from night to morning, and she paused at the rehab glass. A turtle surfaced, blinked its ancient eyes, tapped the pane, and slipped down again like a moon setting. She set her palm to the cool acrylic. Thank you, she thought, not to the glass, but to the long chain of work that had carried this quiet here. Lee was already at the flume with a coil of bright cable and a pencil behind one ear. She lifted a hand without looking up. Morning, she said. Morning, Celeste said, voice steady in that way she had earned. She liked that steadiness, the way she liked a stamp landing straight. The day's plan ran on the whiteboard like a charted current. A school group in the morning, a buoy redeployment near noon, a community map upload after lunch, a press call before evening, not for spectacle but for instructions. Ramos's name sat beside the last entry. a mark that meant she would stand in the room and keep the law present without raising her voice. The bus breathed out a flock of children that smelled of cereal and windbreakers. They moved like shorebirds, quick in the feet and loud in the throat, curious the way creatures are before someone teaches them to pretend otherwise. Celeste kept them by the glass, then drew them to the tables where careful things could be shown. She timed her lines to their eyes, finding what mattered. This die shows how water moves when it meets warmer water, she said. This is why a plume turns. This is how a fish reads a river inside the sea. She let silence hold until their murmurs rose, questions breaking the surface like air. A girl at the edge wore a jacket with a cracked zipper and a stare that did not flinch. She did not raise her hand. She waited until the others drifted toward the small rays that looked like winged smiles. Then she said, "I can smell when the river is wrong." Celeste nodded, as if the child had placed an instrument on the table. "Then you already know more than most models," she said. "Keep that nose. We will give it numbers to carry." The girl's shoulders loosened by a fraction. It was enough. Later, Celeste told Lee to put the family on the list for the weekend field day. Boots, bus, lunch. No forms that ask what they do not need to know. Near noon, the boat slid from the dock with the soft slap of fenders against wood. The sky had gone steel bright. The wind set its jaw, and unclenched, Ramos stood at the gunwale with a clipboard in a bag that would survive a spill and a smile that did not show teeth. "Short window," she said. "We read the water, then go." They set the new collar on the sensor, checked the clamps twice. "Read the serial aloud." Lee answered with the checklist, a call and response learned by a small choir that had decided to become a force. The buoy slid over the side, no splash larger than a sentence. Celeste watched it take its station and felt the old itch of fear turn into a thing with another name. Alignment. On the way back, a skimmer banked low and lifted on the wind with such ease its shadow felt deliberate. Ramos read a message that glowed blue on her palm. The court denied the last motion to delay. She said, "The rule stands. The calendar for compliance is posted." Celeste leaned her temple to the cold rail. The taste of metal rode the back of her tongue, then faded. "Good," she said, and let the single word do its job. The water worked on. The law would meet it where it stood. Afternoon arrived with the press call. The room had learned to make space without crowding. Tripods were lower, microphones closer, question cleaner. Celeste stood behind the simple acrylic podium that had become less a wall and more a lens. She had never liked podiums. She used this one because the work asked her to, and she had learned the quiet power of standing where everyone could see the same map at the same time. Ramos laid a chain of custody form flat beside the podium and smoothed one corner with a finger. "We will make this part of the briefing," she said. "Proof is not only for courtrooms." Celeste kept her sentences built to be carried, none fenced with decoration. "The first wave of disclosures is due next month," she said. "Facilities will post volume, substances, hours, outfall maps, and maintenance logs. Sensors will confirm. Community reports will help us triage. We will not publish names before we have facts. We will not ignore facts to spare names." She pointed to a slide that showed the coast not as a postcard, but as mouths and veins. "If you have records, bring them. If you have questions, ask them. If someone tells you your nose is not evidence, ask them to stand downwind of a pipe and try again." A hand rose in the back, a reporter whose voice had learned not to perform. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Of what?" Celeste said. "Of becoming the story instead of the work." She let a beat show the shape of the room. "The reef is the story," she said. "The students are the story. The fisherman who can sell their catch again will be the story. I am a relay. The current runs through. That is all. When the room emptied and the last camera winked out, a tug came at her sleeve. The girl from morning stood with her mother, whose eyes looked like late winter, and whose mouth had learned not to ask a second time. The girl held a small bag of heavy plastic. Inside lay 3 pale green shards of glass, tumbled and smooth. We found these by the jetty. The girl from morning stood with her mother, whose eyes looked like late winter, and whose mouth had learned not to ask a second time. Celeste took the bag in 2 hands as if it were an egg. She remembered the day she had let her own shard go, and how the water had accepted it without theater. She knelt so her eyeline met theirs. They are yours. Until you decide they are not, she said. If you keep them, they remind you that broken things still bend light. If you throw them back, they join the lens the sea already is. Both are good answers. The girl looked to her mother. The mother nodded once, making permission simple because it could be. The girl chose one piece and placed the other 2 in Celeste's palm. The mother nodded once, making permission simple because it could be. For the turtles, she said. For the turtles, she said. And the words felt like a blessing that had taken the long way to arrive. Evening leaned down. The center emptied by degrees. The pumps kept singing. The flume went quiet. Ramos finished her last email and set the phone face down to teach it manners. Lee closed a case with a clasp snap that sounded like a door locking after a long day. Celeste walked the corridor once more, checking the red points on the racks and the small green heart lights on the panels. Everything beat. She stepped to the seawall with the 2 shards in her pocket. The bay had gone pewter. Wind wrote stipples across the surface like a language she was learning to read. She stood with her toes at the edge and breathed air that tasted of rust and rain and clean. She rolled 1 shard between finger and thumb. Sarah would have laughed. She thought, Sarah would have said that even the broken parts keep working. She lifted her hand and let the glass fall. It sank without spectacle, heavy with memory, light with purpose, joining the slow grammar of the tide. A shoe scuffed the stone behind her. She turned. Ramos stood a few paces back, hands in coat pockets, hair pulled low against the wind. You never keep trophies, Ramos said. Evidence stays. Celeste said, trophies go. A small smile reached one corner. You taught me that without trying. Ramos made a sound like a laugh that refused to be loud. We have a new letter, she said. Another town wants training. A mayor who used to dodge calls wants a meeting with numbers. Good, Celeste said. The word opened like a small door. They walked inside, shoulders near, the kind of closeness that comes after a fight fought right. The hall light flickered once and settled. The place smelled of salt and plastic and bleach and latex and hope, a uniform she did not have to wear to be recognized. At her desk, she opened the folder called Work and added a line to the page she kept at the top. Chain of proof, chain of care, chain of repair. Below, she wrote one more, chain of teaching. She looked until it felt earned, then saved the file. Before leaving, she looped back to the tank. The turtle rose again, unhurried, as if it had learned her schedule. It bumped the glass with the soft patience of the saved. Celeste set the last shard on the ledge instead of in the water. Not everything needs to return. Some things can stay where hands can see them. A piece of tide turned tangible. She would use it for a lesson no textbook would print. Night had put on its deeper blue. The road to her apartment lay quiet in a way that welcomed. She walked it at the pace of the pumps, an even measure that could run until morning. Passing the edge of the old estate, she paused. The mansion sat back from the road with warm windows that no longer pretended at power. The pool was a lagoon now, glass walls wet with breath. Volunteers moved like careful weather with nets and clipboards and good hands. No champagne, no theater, just work. She watched a young tech ease a turtle into a sling and lower it into the water. The animal floated, then pushed, then found the angle that made motion simple. Something in her chest answered with the same angle. She could call it peace. She did not. Peace sounded like an ending. This felt like a beginning that had learned to be quiet. At her door she paused with the key. The day had carried its weight and set it down without breaking anything. She opened the lock, stepped inside, and let the room hold her. In the window the bay made a thin line of light she could read by if she wanted. She did not. She closed her eyes, then opened them to the fact of morning already waiting somewhere beyond the dark. Her heart no longer beat to the frantic rhythm of a broken pump, but to the steady measure of the tide. The ocean spoke its single tense. She answered with work. Every story leaves behind a quiet echo, and Celeste's journey reminds us that justice often begins not with noise, but with one person deciding to stop being afraid. The world doesn't always reward kindness or courage right away. Sometimes it punishes it first. Yet, as Celeste learned, the truth has its own current. It might twist, delay, or disappear beneath the surface, but it never truly stops moving. Standing up to injustice doesn't always mean shouting the loudest. Sometimes it means standing still long enough for others to see what's real. This story invites us to look at our own reflections, the jobs we take to survive, the systems we obey out of fear, the silences we convince ourselves are safety. Real gold fears no fire, as the saying goes, and our integrity is that gold, whether it's walking away from a toxic relationship, refusing to enable corruption, or simply believing our voice matters in a world that profits from quiet obedience. The act of speaking truth, even softly, is a form of courage. So take a moment to ask yourself, what current are you standing against? And what truth have you left unsaid? If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Maybe tell us about a time you stood up, or wished you had. Leave a like. If you believe stories like this help us see clearer, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of resilience and redemption. Until then, may you find peace after the storm, strength in your own voice, and the calm certainty that even the smallest ripple can change the tide.